Welcome to the third Atlanta AWS Meetup group, building AMIs automatically with Animator and Packer. If you've ever tried to take a project from development into production in a continuous integration type of way, you need a decent way on how to build your AMIs. And we're going to take a look tonight at two third-party tools with Rob Sweet and Luke Reimer I'm sorry, Luke's not doing that. Kyle on how to do that. My name's Adam Book. I'm from OpenSpan. A little bit about OpenSpan. OpenSpan does automations for back office systems to help streamline your processes. Two of the sponsors for the group are OpenSpan and AlertLogic. AlertLogic is an AWS partner who helps with your security and compliance items. We're starting a new section this month, which are some of the rundowns. I don't know if anybody gets these emails, but some of you may or may not. So we're going to talk about some of the high-level updates that came from AWS since our last meeting. So one of the first ones is that CloudFormation is now supporting OpsWorks. A second one is DynamoDB added support for importing and exporting via the AWS Management Console. A big one I thought was there's now logs on ELB. You can now have access logs that go into an S3 bucket, and you can specify in intervals of 5 or 60 minutes. More information is at the URL, which we'll post on the slides on the group. There's a new CLI version. We talked about the CLI last month, but instead of installing, you can just use the pip install with the -upgrade, and that upgrade CLI version will allow for the support of the ELB logs. The ELB also now has some new security features. It added support for the perfect forward secrecy through elliptic curve key exchange. Sometimes a little bit more than everybody needs to know, but it does add a lot more enhancements for security and securing your traffic through ELB. And now on to our main program. So, Rob, this point in time, that was all I had, and on to the main part of our show. You want the lapel mic, or?
Sure. Okay. I would love to get my guy up here, but my guy is not in the room. So we will get to him later. He will tell you wonderful things about Mannheim. So I'm Rob Sweet. I'm an advisory engineer for AWS Cloud here at Mannheim. We are one of the largest wholesale auto auction systems in the country. We've got 25-ish physical auctions around the country. We do online sales with video and everything. We've got something that is sort of like eBay for the wholesale car market, and we are in the process of moving, not so much moving our stuff to the cloud, but carving pieces of our existing legacy applications off and putting them up in the cloud. And I work on the team that is figuring out sort of what our best practices are and how that all should work. So a big part of this is configuration management. So how do people build Linux boxes? Just to get a feel for kind of where we are in the room. How many people have beautiful and unique snowflakes? Anybody still building them by hand? Andrew, come on. Nobody? Really? That's awesome. That makes me very happy. I'm actually really surprised. Zero. Okay, who's using Puppet? I can only count Mannheim once. We have a bunch of Mannheim people in here. One? That's it? Nobody else? Wah, wah.
What about Chef?
I'm getting there. Chef. 1, 2. You're not using Chef.
Not at work.
That's right, not at work.
I wouldn't dream of it.
3-ish. And then who is using something else? What are you using?
Just the AMI CLI tool. So
Okay.
using the AWS CLI and then stamping the AMI.
Okay, but how are you telling the process like what it should be putting on your boxes?
I guess.
Is it just shell scripts that like load?
Capistrano.
Okay, Cap. What are you using?
Cloud formation.
Okay.
Who said that?
All right, so that gives us a little bit of an idea. So, next obvious question, because this is about AMIs, is why you should bother with AMIs. AMIs make it faster if the software is already on. If Apache is already on the box, other things are already on the box. Faster spin up time. So if your auto scaling group needs to actually scale up, it's going to be a bit faster if you're using AMIs versus just spinning up a generic AMI and having it to load everything on boot. For testing, it's nice from a QA perspective because rather than testing just the piece of software as it moves through your pipeline and testing it sort of in a vacuum, you're actually testing it in the full ecosystem that it will be in when it's deployed because you're deploying the whole machine image out to prod, right? So you don't have the problem where you had this version of the library in QA and a different version in prod, and all of a sudden everything blows up. Easier rollback. So we have with us Aaron Feng. He gave a talk, and I mentioned him at the bottom here. He gave a talk at DevOps Atlanta in January about AMIs and why they're good and why they're good for your pipeline. And I would definitely urge you to go have a look at his talk to find out more about this. This is really sort of out of scope for the talk tonight. The talk tonight is more about exactly how you do it. Some links that might be handy. Particularly for those of you with laptops, the bottom link. That's where I have all the stuff from this presentation, including the slides. So if you want to follow along with the Puppet manifests or the shell scripts or any of that, the bottom link is what you want to look at. So the first thing we need to do is bootstrap the box that's actually going to do the animating. So let's launch an instance here. And we're just going to use stock Amazon Linux. I'm going to use a small. Default settings are fine. That security group.
Hey, how's it going?
And why do I feel like I missed something? That should be good. Okay. So we'll give this just a second. So if I go over to, this is the repo that I had in the other slide. So basically, we've got 3 steps that we need to do. We need to build our Aminator box, the box that's actually going to build the AMI images. We're going to actually run the command to make the AMI and register it with Amazon. And then we're going to launch the box, right? I'm actually demonstrating a 2-stage configuration. So I'm basically running Puppet twice, once as part of the animation process to build the AMI, the second time as some post-configuration that's environment-specific. So ideally, you want to do as much when you're baking the AMI as possible versus configuring it later, because that ensures that what you've got in your AMI is as similar as possible to what you're going to end up with in prod. But there are certain things that you might want to do after it's launched, like change where the logs go. Pre-prod environments go over here to this logly account, prod goes to that one over there, or change some of the tagging involved so that it goes to the right bucket or something. But you want to minimize that. So that's going to be there. And that's probably really small. So let me open it. Let's see.
Can you make the font?
Yep. That is totally not what I want. Is that big enough for bigger?
Maybe like a couple more.
That do? Okay, so we're in. So in the repo that I sent out, these are the steps to bootstrap our Aminator. So we're going to change to root. We're going to install Puppet and Git. We're going to git clone this repo, and then we're going to run a Puppet apply and include Aminator. And that Aminator module in here actually puts everything that we need on. You can go in and look at the Puppet manifests on your own, but I'll step through a little bit what it does while we're waiting for other things. So we install Puppet and Git. Do our git clone. And build the Aminator box. So this will just take a second.
Hey, Rob, while we're waiting, maybe you can provide a little bit of background about exactly what Aminator is and how it relates to Puppet.
Sure, absolutely. So Aminator is a tool. Sorry, that's an excellent point. So Aminator is a tool that is open sourced by Netflix, and it's specifically for building AMIs. You need to run it on an AMI, or an AWS box. That box has to have certain permissions, whether you set up the keys for Bodo to give it those permissions, or preferably give it an IAM role that has those permissions. The way it works is you tell Aminator what AMI you want to start with as kind of your foundation AMI that you're going to build on top of. It snapshots the disk for that AMI, mounts it as a virtual disk, change roots into that, and then runs whatever you're telling it to run as your provisioner. In this case, it runs the Puppet provisioner. It's an Aminator plugin that I wrote, and it does a Puppet run to do the rest of the configuration. Anybody have any questions about that part?
Yeah, what was that? How does it take the snapshot of a one of the steps?
How does Aminator do it?
Yeah.
There are API commands to do it. I don't think it's complicated, but I haven't actually looked at the Aminator code that does that. I assume they just talk to the API and tell it make a snapshot.
Yeah, of a virtual machine?
Of the AMI. So what you're doing is you're starting with an AMI that already exists on Amazon. That's an EBS-backed AMI, and it's just taking the EBS volume that the AMI points to and making an Amazon snapshot of that.
Oh, okay.
So this is not a process that you can use for a VM that you have on your desktop or something. This is something that you have to start with an Amazon AMI with.
What kind of IAM roles does it? Because when I was looking at the instructions that were right there on the screen, it said add the least permissive IAM role.
Well,
Is it
Bob,
like this
I'm
example
glad
here?
you asked. So if we go over here to the page, so right here, least permissive, and then this is actually a link to the Aminator doc on this policy. So that's the policy that it actually needs.
So you just copy and paste that
Yep.
IAM role and then align
Yep,
it.
I made a new IAM role. I copied and pasted this policy as its only policy, and I'm good to go. So it's pretty straightforward.
You said it was EBS back. Does it also do instance based?
I don't know. That is a fine question. Couldn't tell you. So if we go back over here, so our Puppet run finished, and it's pretty straightforward. It makes sure that the pip package is installed for Python. I actually do an upgrade for pip because the RPMs available are 1.3 and Aminator wants at least 1.4. I install Aminator, and I can show you the command to do that. So welcome to Puppet. My one Puppet guy will understand this. So this is the actual command that it runs to install Aminator, and so it just does a pip install and it hands it the URL for the repo, and pip handles the rest. Then we install the Aminator Puppet plugin, and you use the Aminator plugin command for that. That comes with Aminator. And then we drop some configs in. The configs are not too complicated. What they do is they add a little bit of configuration that has to do with the Puppet provisioner, and tell it to also copy a couple of their files from the Aminator machine into the disk image when it's doing things. Resolve.conf, a couple of the repo files. So you guys can look in the Puppet manifest and see what all it's copying in there. It's pretty easy to find. But it's just like 3 files. So at this point, we've got a working Aminator box. Can it do -- version? I don't know. Yeah, so there you go. So we can now emanate, and the run took 30 seconds, so if I hadn't been talking, it would have been really fast. So now that we've got that, we want to actually emanate. And actually, my slide is a better slide for this, I think. Yeah, kind of. That's awfully small. Sorry. Let's go back to this one. So this is the script that I'm going to run on the Aminator box to actually do the emanating. So I'm setting what a variable. This is just shell. I'm setting a variable that says this is my AMI that I want to start with. This is just an example of passing a Puppet fact, just an arbitrary fact into Puppet. Facts are what Puppet uses to make decisions. This is just an example of how you would pass a fact into it. The Puppet class, this is the Puppet module that we want it to actually include. And the first thing that we do that's real is we tar up the manifests. So I've got a modules directory that you can see in the repo that's actually got the 2 Puppet modules in it. I'm just grabbing both modules and dropping them in. Really, I would only need the web server one. And so this is the actual important part. So this is the command that we care about. So we're going to emanate. We're going to turn on debug. Name tells it how to name the AMI. -B tells it what AMI we want to start with. Preserve odd error is something that you might want to have on. It does exactly what it sounds like. If there's an error in the process of emanating, it will, rather than destroying the change-rooted disk, it will leave it up so you can go in and poke around and see what went wrong. And so the 2 Puppet arguments are right here. This is me passing in that fact from up above, and this is me telling Puppet to include that class, right? And I'm also passing the tarball of my manifests, right? So those 3 things are specific to the Puppet provisioner. There is a chef provisioner that comes with Aminator. I haven't used it, but that's what it was created to use, so I'm sure it works great. So if you're a chef shop, should be in good shape. This part down here just greps the AMI ID out of the log file, because Aminator doesn't give you a good way to get that out. You just have to scrape the log for it. This is going to bomb if we didn't get an AMI ID like we expected, and this just drops it in a file. This script is actually what I use for Jenkins. So Jenkins would run this script and then take the AMI ID file at the end and archive that as an artifact of the build. So that's how you can import that into another build to pass the AMI ID to a CloudFormation script or something like that. So this is what we're going to do. So this is already in the repo that we've got right here. So actually, well, yeah, we'll go ahead. Yep.
Can you just do an LS on the modules on this?
Sure.
I've never seen manifest look like it. Just text file.
So modules is that. Web server manifests.
And then the directory you were tarring up was the...
This modules directory. Yep. So I'm just tarring up both modules that are there. I've only got the 2 modules. one for the Aminator box, one for the web server. Like I said, I only need the web server module to actually build the web server, but I'm just grabbing both because it's easy. So, away we go. Awesome. That is nice. Exception B, instance data. I'm a big tool. So you remember that bit about the role and making sure that it has the policy and everything? Yeah, I started the instance without the role. Don't do that. It doesn't work. But I was a smart kid and have one sitting in the wings. Okay.
You didn't jump without a parachute, right?
Okay, so we have the latest stuff. So let's try this again. That looks better.
Yeah.
So this doesn't take too long, minute or three, I think, for most. Well, okay.
Who's on the call? Anyway. You know?
I didn't start a call. I don't know what the deal is.
Oh, for real.
So while this is running, questions about this part of the process? Everybody's good? So what you're seeing here, it's pulling the modules out, or rather the Puppet manifests out of that tarball, and right now it is using Yum to install Puppet. Incidentally, this is a micro, or maybe it's a small, but it's a fairly small box, so it's a little slower than it has to be. So it'll just be a minute.
But you did have a lot of custom stuff on that manifest I saw, so it should be just basic.
Yeah, the slowest part is actually installing Puppet and installing, well, mostly installing Puppet. Yes, sir.
Yeah, pretty much, that leads to my question, how much overhead is Puppet adding up top of this in terms of?
I mean, some. So it depends on how slow their repo is right now.
Yeah, and there's no runtime impact to, this is just a one-time deal, right? You take the AMI and then you run that through the pipeline and deploy it ultimately to the whatever environment we're targeting.
Okay, so we just finished.
But you said you are doing some provisioning when you deploy the machine?
Yeah,
A very little bit. You'll see.
so we give it sort of a personality. So we'll derive certain URLs or S3 buckets, or we'll do a bit of configuration tweaking.
With Puppet?
Yeah.
We do it with Puppet. We do it through user data.
Right.
On the ECU.
So we have one line in user data that just kicks off Puppet, and it passes a special fact that I'll show called launch config to tell it, hey, this is a run for like a running instance, not just making an AMI. And so that's where we do environment-specific configuration.
And where does that kind of configuration come from? Like where is Puppet pulling that configuration? Is it part
So-
of the AMI? Or?
So when I build the AMI, what that plugin is doing, that Puppet plugin, is it's taking the tarball of the Puppet manifests and dropping it into Etsy Puppet modules, right? So the Puppet modules, or the Puppet manifests that I care about are already on the box when it boots, right? So all I'm doing is running Puppet apply again, basically the same command, but just passing it an extra fact saying, hey, you're in launch config mode, so if you have any launch config stuff to do, do that. And it's called launch config because that's what you call the CloudFront stuff, when you're spinning up a new box, right? So I mean, it's there are lots of ways that you could do
So
it.
each module will have to be aware of what mode it's launching on and accordingly do its stuff.
If it has things that you want to do after, when the instance is actually booting, depending on your use case, you may not have anything that you care about setting at boot time. You may be able to do everything as part of making your AMI. That's preferable, but it's a pretty common use case that you want to do at least a little bit of configuration after it comes up.
Give it a personality.
Right.
Yeah, host name.
Yeah, maybe a host name, although, host names are for pets.
What task
These aren't
list are you
pets.
working on? Working on?
I saw it take a lot of snapshots at the end. Did you customize it to take the snapshot?
No, it didn't take a lot of snapshots.
You got like 4
It was
packages.
timing out waiting for it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just waiting for the snapshot to be finished creating, and this is waiting for it to detach from the instance.
Because when you necessarily burn an AMI just with the copy image, you don't necessarily get a snapshot by default.
When you burn an AMI with copy image. So it's already made a copy at the beginning of the process.
You don't necessarily get a snapshot of your instance. So I'm just wondering if that's something from Animator versus
Oh yeah, this is the process that Aminator is going through.
right. Taking
Yeah,
the snapshot.
all this output is from Aminator itself, where it takes the disk image that so it takes the original, snapshots it, mounts that to this machine, does what it's going to do, unmounts it, and then tells Amazon, hey, make this an AMI. Right?
Right.
So the two things that we were waiting for were the snapshot to finish and the volume to detach. So at this point, we have an AMI that we should be able to boot and go. So we want to launch an instance. I want to go to My AMIs, go to this one, right? That's the later one. Yeah. We're just going to use a micro for this. Don't need. So this is what I should have set for my Aminator box, is this IAM role. But I'm a big tool and forgot. So, right. Tag your boxes. It's a really good idea. If you're not using tags, you really, really should be. So the security group that I'm giving this just has SSH and HTTP from anywhere. And I almost skipped my step. So one thing that we want to do is go in here to the user data. And so remember how we're doing the second stage puppeting? This is where you tell it to do that. So if you were using CloudFormation in your auto-scaling group in your launch config, you would put what I'm about to put in here. And this is in the repo as well.
So for the record, we don't do any of this manual stuff, right?
No, this is just for the
Part of
demo.
all of our tooling, automation.
So you'll notice here I'm setting our special guest to be our friend in the back there. All right, and so it'll take a minute for this to spin up. So, more questions. People have to want to know things. Nothing? Everybody's good?
Rob, can you give like specific examples of what goes in the Puppet manifest? Because I'm kind of new to this.
Sure. So we use Puppet to do all the provisioning. So you know, when you're the foundation AMI is just a base Linux system. It doesn't have Apache. It doesn't have, you know, it has Java. It has Ruby, you know, languages and stuff. But it doesn't have most of your software packages, right? So part of what's in our Puppet manifest for this is installing Apache. I mean, it doesn't do very much. We can have a look at it. So if I back up. So for the web server, this is it. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
So I'm adding a repo for Amazon updates. I'm installing PHP 5. I've got index HTML, making sure that's absent. I'm dropping in a document root, and I'm making sure HTTP is ready. Right? And I just use PHP because it's really simple to, you know, make a page that does something interesting without having a Rails application or anything like that. It's just easy.
How did you get GitHub keys on that AMI? So you could.
SSH keys? That's part of spinning up an instance. You tell it what keys to use. In fact, if you don't tell it what keys to use, it gives you a warning saying, hey, are you really sure? There are some companies that purposely don't put keys on their instances. Okay, so we'll just let this run a little bit. So with any luck, this will be up momentarily. So we're just waiting for the instance to spin up.
What about Windows?
What about Windows? I have no idea. I don't do any Windows admin. So I know you can do Puppet things with Windows. I haven't actually done it. I assume the same is true of Chef.
You're not going to animate a Windows box.
Probably not. Although maybe you can. I have no idea.
Right? Because it's running Python and rest is just Amazon API stuff, right?
I mean, yeah. I guess if you're just mounting the disk, you can shuffle files around. I don't know. I don't imagine you could use GUI installers, but there's maybe some awesome way to do that. So we managed to catch it in the small period while Apache is up, but the post configuration is still happening. Mm-hmm.
So we currently use like cloud formation packages we need. We don't have any custom AMIs.
Okay.
So what are the, we have pretty simple infrastructure, so we can do that. But what are the specific limitations you reach to where you have to use your own custom AMI?
It's not so much a limitation thing as a choice thing, really. So there are, like I said, some speed advantages to making your own AMIs, and you may or may not care about those speed advantages. You may not care that it takes an extra 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes to get your instance up when it needs to scale. If you're doing, background processing, well, okay, so it starts up a minute or two later than it would have. Big deal, right? If you have a lot of stuff that you install, maybe that's important. If you've got a bunch of sample data, a couple gigs of sample data that you want to put on that disk so that it's ready when the thing boots, right? You probably would want to prep that ahead of time instead of having to copy a couple gigs worth of data onto that disk. Now, that's not a great example, but you get the idea, right? So if you want to do things ahead of time to set up your machines, then those are some of the reasons why you would do it. The other big reason that I see is for QA purposes. Again, you're testing the software that you've built with the whole ecosystem around it, all the OS, and you're testing that through your whole pipeline until it gets to prod. So there's no chance that you're going to have different library versions or different software versions of anything as you go through. So
you just have to make periodic reevaluations to make sure you get the security updates on it, because eventually
Sure.
if you stay frozen too long,
yeah, so Amazon puts out, every 6 months they put out a new set of AMIs, I believe. At least that's what I've seen historically, right?
Twice a year.
Right. So, pay attention to that, and at least every 6 months, update your thing. I don't have this trying to do any kind of Yum update on the boxes. You would try to do that as part of the emanating process rather than later, so for the same reasons, right? So that you can test with everything installed before you go through your pipeline. But you could certainly make a way to do that. I just haven't. So, as you can see, our post-boot configuration happened, and we now know who our special guest is. So yeah, that's kind of it, beginning to end. That's the process. Questions? Everybody cool?
How do you handle the configuration management after it's been deployed? The one answer can be none, right? The only way to change configuration is you redeploy. And I'm more interested in do you guys do something else other than that? Just because a global redeploy may be.
Sure. So when you say configuration management, what do you include in that?
So one common thing is if you're doing feature toggles, right? You have your stuff deployed, you want to toggle some features on for some subset of users just to see if they like it or if it's working or not, right? And do you guys handle that? Like that would be.
So I personally would say that you should use the soon-to-be-released CF deployer gem and do a blue-green deployment. So we're actually coming out with a gem to do blue-green deployments for CloudFormation, similar to what EB Deployer does. Hopefully, we're hoping we can release that. We're still talking to the lawyers, making sure they're cool. But I personally would say just redeploy, especially if you can do a zero downtime deployment. Just redeploy.
The type of deployments that we're talking about are fairly lightweight, right? We're targeting a continuous delivery, continuous deployment sort of model, right? And we're with the gem that they've put together, we can take a and we're also, I mean, it's really about the way that we design and architect for the cloud, right? We're not building these big giant monolithic apps, right? We're building microservices and service oriented, loosely coupled, well defined, all that stuff. So what we can do is we can take, so we have an images API, for example, that has an image scaler and
Actually, we'll probably
some workers and workflow and whatnot. We can target each component independently, right? So if we need to deploy to just the image scale, we can target that particular component in the app, and we use CNAME swaps and auto scalar swaps and whatnot for zero downtime.
Yeah, the reason why I ask this is because the one thing I think, obviously this technology came from, Netflix right there, like 5 years ahead of time, before everybody, right? And I think a lot of people still think this is weird, but this should be like the norm, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is that they actually have dynamic configuration management. Unfortunately, yeah, it's written in Java. I'm actually surprised other communities like Ruby, Python, PHP, don't actually adopt that way of thinking that, so that's kind of why I was curious if you guys, I don't know if you guys are PHP shop.
We're looking at that configuration database, right? And we can dynamically inject, configuration changes and have that surface, in real time.
Right. But it's a double-edged sword, right? If you add configuration that you can do on the fly, then ideally you're testing, on and off, right? Well, if you've got, 4 toggles that you could have on or off, you have to test all the combinations of those.
Yeah.
So, that's your organization's decision, how rigorous you care about being in your testing, and who, maybe if there's only one dude that has rights to flip those switches, that you're okay with, not testing all the combinations because that dude knows enough to know which switches are okay and which aren't. It's really specific to your organization and how you write software and kind of your use cases.
I guess it really depends on your use cases. Some of the internal customers we serve, some of them go through the redeploy 300 VMs to the release that then destroy the existing 300.
Yeah.
So from that approach, the AMI will benefit them a lot because almost all of them are basically the same, and they have need to pull down 2 gig of data if they actually need to pull everyone to 2 gig. Some others will prefer to extensive management of their applications down to different behavior on the application logic. That way, whatever they need to do, we're actually using identity to do public kick to trigger a one-time run across their own clusters to apply the new behavior, whichever has already passed, I guess, the environment, like environments already.
Yep.
Hey Rob, let's say I've gone down the path of tinkering, creating, expanding on, in this case I'm using Ubuntu, I'm not using the Amazon image.
Mm-hmm.
And I've lost track of what I put on the system. And I know you can do easy things, you can do, you can list all the packages, but I'm wondering, is there a way to reverse it and say, what I've done to this system, I want you to take that and kind of reanimate it, if you will? Tools that exist to do that?
So, you could have been doing anything, right? So, you can dig through history logs and try to see what happened. But honestly, when I get myself into that situation, I actually prefer to just bring up a new instance, start from scratch, take notes as I go. And really, if you're doing that, you should be taking notes as you go. Because ideally, what you're going to take those notes and put it into a Puppet manifest or a chef recipe, right? So that it's a repeatable process. And that's actually why I decided to go ahead and use Puppet to build my Aminator box, right? So that it was a repeatable process. I've got it in version control with a manifest. Version control is good.
So there's no diff,
Hmm?
diff between this machine and a diff between that machine.
There might be ways to do it, but I don't know how you could reliably turn that into run these commands to make that machine.
I mean, if you have to, you can do that. I did that in the past. Basically, you're just doing, just do a find, then identify some all the files, then find differences, then do a diff against all of them if you have to.
Right.
But
But you don't necessarily know what made the change is the
Right.
problem.
Right.
So, and you can certainly take that box that you've handcrafted as your snowflake, right? And clone that and make a new AMI. You could turn it into an AMI and launch that, right? But I mean, the whole point of using Aminator in this fashion is that you're using a repeatable process and you're using configuration management, be it Puppet or Chef or something else, to have this be a process that you can repeat every time and have it be consistent and reliable. So don't do it by hand. I mean, so do it by hand to figure out what the steps are, and then put that into configuration management. Any other questions?
So can you go over what the limitations are of Aminator? Because I know you guys are building on CF4. Like Aminator would not do auto-scaling groups, for instance.
Oh, no. So Aminator is just for building AMIs.
Right.
Like it doesn't care, it doesn't do anything with deploying stuff to Amazon or any of that. It only builds AMIs. That's its whole job.
Okay.
And so we use this in a Jenkins pipeline. The project that's probably the biggest right now actually goes through and it makes all the artifacts and then it runs Aminate jobs in parallel. And I think we kick out 9 different AMIs, and because they're in parallel, it takes 3 or 4 minutes. So it's if you can do something like that, it really doesn't take much time to be able to custom bake your AMIs. It's not that hard. Once you play with it a little bit and learn the process, it's really a piece of cake.
With that though, I do know with the pipeline you did hit an issue where you had to put like a small sleep in, right? Because you had mount
Yes.
contentions.
Yes. So that's one thing we did run into with Aminator. Because all the Aminate jobs are running on the same couple of boxes, you can actually get a race condition where 2 Aminate jobs are looking for an open mount point to use, and they both pick the same one, and then whoever wins that race, the other one bombs out. Right? So if you were doing this in a Jenkins pipeline, your pipeline is going to bomb out when that happens, and that sucks. So the way we got around that is just by putting a 10-second sleep between those jobs, so that it just spreads them out enough to avoid that race condition.
Can't you configure the mount point?
Can you configure the mount point? I don't think so. Aminator has a thing that it uses to figure out what mount points it should be using, so it just takes the first one available. It's got a range of mount points, just device names. Anybody else?
Quick question. So are you guys, is the next presentation going to be on Packer?
Yep.
Okay. Do you guys also use Packer?
We do not, which is why I'm not giving that presentation.
Okay.
Nor do we use Chef.
Okay.
But the next one will be Packer and Chef.
We actually use Packer.
Cool. Anybody else? Okay, you're good. I'm going to leave the audio running.
Okay. Get him the mic. Sir. Just click it. It's probably just you don't get that high. Good. Good. What's the jam you're writing? It's a Aminator. What's the jam you guys are writing?
So it's a cloud formation deployment gem. So we use it to
I thought it was feature toggle jam.
we use it to generate the JSON files that we then feed to CloudFormation to blow up our environments, right? So we have a continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline where we use these concepts to stand up an environment with 35 machines, right, and then and then tear it down. So that's what we use Aminator for.
Cool. Well, my name is Kyle Gothenauer. I do DevOps with a company called Spinnin' down in Macon, Georgia. We're a small IT company. We do infrastructure such as supporting servers, workstations. We also do development, writing PHP applications, and also deploying stuff in Amazon. We use Packer and Chef to basically do the same thing that Rob does using Puppet and Aminator. I'm going to talk just a little bit about each one of these tools are at high level because there's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down. But so if you want a lot more, the links that Rob had up earlier, packer.io and getchef.com will be good. So Packer works to build images from a single configuration. You build a JSON-based template, and the template is composed of a couple different parts. You have a builder that determines what you're going to use to build it, a provisioner, so you could use Chef or Salt or Ansible or even Puppet, and then a post-processor. So you've done your build. Do you want to do anything with it afterward? Do you want to make a Vagrant box? Do you want to send it to VMware? These are the different builders that Packer supports. Tonight we're only going to cover AWS, but you can build a ESX box for workstation. You can build an ESX box for vSphere. Docker containers, send to OpenStack, Google Compute, DigitalOcean, or even virtual boxes. As far as provisioning goes, you can just provision straight with shell scripts. It actually uses Chef Solo. In a recent version, it just started using Chef Server. I'll touch on what those two are in just a minute, though. You can use Puppet, Salt, Ansible, and then post-processing. So once it's done its build, what are you going to do with it afterwards? And that's sending it to Vagrant or vSphere or Docker. As far as Chef, it's a Ruby-based. You write what are called cookbooks that contain recipes, and that's what you do. The recipe is basically your ingredient list to build a server. And then you can set attributes and templates to deploy different things within the server. It runs in two versions. Chef Solo just basically is a workstation version. It doesn't use any overhead or anything like that as far as like having an extra server. Whereas Chef Server, all of the workstations can actually connect and talk to that central server, and the central server can keep them updated. But we use Chef Solo with Packer. So just going to do a quick demo like Rob did. We're going to use a Packer template to build an AMI and show how Chef Solo is provisioning. And there are the links for more information and all the documentation for all these products. So this show up. So this is a Packer template. What it is a provisioner. So what we're going to do to the box, and then a builder is what we're actually going to build. And so we're going to build an Amazon EBS. Packer actually supports building Amazon EBS-backed instances, Amazon instance-backed instances, so the empirical ones, and then you can also do a Cheruta build, which is how Aminator works. We typically use Amazon EBS and also instance backs for our AMIs. This is just a simple one. I'll show you some more detailed builders in just a second. So what this builder is going to do is it's going to call Chef Solo, and it's going to look for its recipes right here, and we'll get to a recipe in just a moment. But that's what it's going to do. So it's going to run through and run a recipe called default in a web install cookbook. And then from there, it's going to build an Amazon EBS-backed instance. And so it'll actually spin up a volume in Amazon, run the provisioner, and then once it's done, it'll turn the volume off, create an image, send that to an AMI, and then turn the old instance off. And there's all different types of configurations you can send to this. The instance type, the source AMI, the name. You can have it launch in a specific VPC ID in a specific subnet, even security groups. And so, well, what does a cookbook look like? So this is a recipe in a cookbook. And the recipe, what it's doing here is using what's called a package. Luke, what's it? Resource? So a resource is it's kind of an agnostic tool from Chef. Is so we're doing package Apache 2 install. So basically, since we're running on Ubuntu, this would basically be the same as apt-get install Apache 2. But if you were running on CentOS, that would be the separate command for Yum. But what Chef does is it doesn't care. You told it to go install Apache 2, so it goes and does that. And how it actually figures out what you're running is when you first launch Chef, it runs a quick scan of the entire system and figures out what packages is there, what your IP address is, all this information. It uses OHI to get that, and it basically just builds a big JSON on the box so that way it knows what's there. And then from there, we can actually pass it a template. In this case, it's just a simple index.html document. It's going to get passed as an ERB file, which is what's the shortcut. What was ERB called? Executable, something Ruby. Embedded Ruby, yes. And so the embedded Ruby is, it can just send a file to this location, or you can actually get in and have the Chef configure the Ruby file for you using Ruby. And so this same thing is a template provisioner, and so it's just taking a template, which is right here in the cookbook on the side, a default one, and then there's the index.html.erb. And it's just assigning the permissions for it root, and we're sending it an action to create. If this thing already exists, it won't do anything. And so what does that file actually look like? Well, it's just a simple HTML document, but it has a attribute in here, and so when this actually displays, it won't just show that the Ruby right here. Back here, actually used an attribute file to pass to there. So this attribute file is, I've created an attribute called web text, and I can put whatever there, and then that will send that to the ERB file. You can also use an attribute to send settings to your recipes, such as like we're using Mongo to specify where the database path should be. So it gets you can do a lot with the attributes. I'm trying to think what else. So once all that's done, you can write your recipe, and then you put it in the run list here, and then you just go into a command prompt. And I don't actually have one that's going to work, so I'm not going to do a demo because it's just going to do the same thing that Rob's does. You type packer build. This one is called web.json. Packer, it'll run through the screen. It'll boot an AMI, wait for it to come up. It'll SSH to the box, do a Chef solo run against the box for your recipes, and then it will turn the box off, do the create image command, turn the box completely off, and then your AMI will come up, and it'll drop the AMI ID out so that way you can use it for your Jenkins pipeline and stuff like that. Some of the more interesting templates that do more different things. So this is one that we've been using lately. It builds a couple different things. We're actually running 3 builders here, and this is running an update script provisioner at the beginning. It just runs apt-get update and apt-get upgrade. And here we're telling it to run as root with no password. And here we're setting some extra stuff if this is going to be used as an application box, so like a local box, not to Amazon. We're telling it that, hey, we want to actually run a Vagrant command and a VMware command to install. I forgot what it installs for Vagrant.
It
but
puts the VMware tools on for
Yeah.
Vagrant and puts the built-in Vagrant user so that when you just do your Vagrant SSH, the keys are already there and that kind of thing. And so it sets up, so we build both boxes simultaneously. So the boxes in the AMI and also the local boxes that the developers use, all from the same script. And that's why that's there for that override.
And so here, right here, it's going to do a Chef solo provision where it's going to install our development cookbook and our application cookbook. And here it does just a cleanup script. And for the local boxes, for the VMware boxes, it does a 0 disk to just clean up the disk.
When it compacts it, when it makes the Vagrant file, it just makes a smaller Vagrant file is all it's doing.
And so the builders, this is an Amazon instance builder. It's a little more of a beast than an EBS version because you actually have to give it the account ID, an S3 bucket. So it actually bundles the volume on itself and then uploads it to an S3 bucket, and then from the S3 bucket, it then makes the AMI image. You also have to send it the cert to actually do all that. And here you actually have to send it a bundle command. So part of this, and this isn't built into Packer, but if you're building an instance-backed AMI, you have to actually install the AMI tools. We use Lytro Cookbook, the camera company. They have a cookbook that installs the AMI tools for us, and so that's what we're using. And then it runs a command. We wrote our own to just specify where stuff was going. And then there's the EBS cookbook that I showed earlier. And then here's our VMware cookbook. Our VMware builder, rather. And it just shows that it's the boot command, because it's actually going to start from an ISO and not an AMI. And so basically we've told it to run the key commands, escape, enter, wait. And then it's going to run a pre-seed file and run through there, and then it'll upload the VMware tools, but it won't install them, and so that's what that provisioner does above. And then our post-processor is we actually create a Vagrant box only for the VMware box right here. So that way, as Jimmy said, when we run a build to send it to Amazon, we also run a build to keep it locally for our developers. Any questions or anything like that? I may have talked too fast or glazed over
What were
the
something.
AMI tools you put up? You said something about you're deploying AMI tools.
You have to, so you have to install, that's just what they're called from Amazon. You have to install the AMI tools. We just use a cookbook from Lytro that does a chef run. So we just added it to our run list for chef.
It's only for the instance back,
Yes.
not for the EBS back.
Okay.
Correct.
Only for the instance back. You have to worry about that.
Because it has that bundle upload command. It does a bundle volume and then bundle upload.
I guess I'm using all EBS back instances, so I'm just
We're using the instance back for the application servers and the processing servers, so when they're shut off, they're done. And so we're using EBS back for the permanent storage things, and then instance back for the application. So if we spin up another web server, when we're through with it and it goes down, it's gone.
Right.
Yes.
Would you be able to compare and contrast Packer
Against Aminator? They both do the same thing. They both get to the same point. What did you say?
I said Packer's better.
That is true. Packer is a bit of a Swiss Army knife. Aminator, they both do the same exact thing. So Aminator will build the cherooted volumes. Packer will also do a build type of Amazon-Cheroot, which does the exact same thing that Aminator does. We went with Packer just simply because we were using Vagrant so much as well, and we need the instance-backed AMIs. But yeah, but also, I mean, if you're doing anything else along with Amazon, like Docker or anything like that, you can do it all in one place. Because Aminator was one of the first things we looked at, but when we knew we needed Vagrant and instance backs, that's why we switched to Packer.
Right. Whereas in our organization, we made the decision pretty early on that we're going to do AWS, and we're not going to try to do multiple different things. We're going to commit there and focus our resources there. And so for us, Aminator works fine. Aminator can also do eucalyptus volumes, and I don't know much about that. I just know they can do it. And it can do Puppet and Chef. And there might be one or two other Korean plugins, but not nearly as many as Packer has.
And the one thing to know is Packer's running Go, so you can
Yes.
run it without dependencies. You don't, with some other tool, you need to get the runtime onto the box before you run the tool, right? So in the case of the Aminator, you need Python on the box, but if you like Go.
And Packer runs locally on your machine. You don't need a box in Amazon running it, although our Jenkins box runs Packer.
And that's because you said it actually spins up in Amazon since they do the
Correct.
processing.
Yeah, from your box, it sends one up in Amazon.
Or if it's building the Vagrant box, then it actually boots up VMware, mounts the ISO, installs everything you need, and then saves it off as a box file or whatever.
So how does this speed compare? Because you didn't actually do a demo here.
It depends on what you're trying to do. Some of our recipes run, we can normally build a box in about 5 or 10 minutes, because some of it also depends on what you're provisioning with.
Right.
As far as the Amazon part, that goes fast. It also depends on what you send it. We've been sending everything T1 micros, but our Logstash and actually the AWS, the Omni tools, are actually these huge zip files that take a long time for a T1 micro to process. So our build time was 30 plus minutes just based on those because we were using T1 micro. Well, we started using C3 large, and that got dropped down to about 10 minutes.
And we do full yum updates, and I mean the boxes are 99.9% done, and then spin off multiple instances. So we have the development same box, everything sitting off. So those are baked.
It's easier and flexible with the JSON template driven to in our environment we actually use script to generate the JSON script based on different profiles as well. So that we're very adaptive for large environment. We have a lot of internal customers to use different scenarios too.
That configuration question earlier, if we actually don't allow SSH access to our boxes, they come up and they're done. So you have to shoot in the head, rescript it, and rebuild it. There is no access. It's set free and no firewall rules, nothing. You can't. So that's another way you can change it.
Yeah, great.
It can be a little rough sometimes to do that, but it does reinforce good practices.
If it's right.
Could you tell more about the background part, which was like, you said it's for developers, how do they use it?
The what?
The Vagrant, you're talking about what Vagrant does? Here, well,
What we
Not so much what it does, but how do you guys use it?
How do you use it?
So the AMI, you got AMI, and y'all pre-bake so many things, so many tools are already in there, and then you start with a straight up ISO of Ubuntu 12 LTS, and so you can use your shell provisioner first to just kind of give it the same playing field and level them out, and then bring them all into the exact same place, and then produce them off, and then save your box off once in S3, and then your developers, when they boot up their local dev boxes, whatever the DevOps guys did, the developers have the exact same version. There is no, well, it worked on my machine, or I saw it work once. Well, there's not supposed to be, but
How do they develop? I mean, if you don't know SSH access, how do they actually put their code in and test it?
there's a build process. They actually pull the code out of the Git repositories. So the developers mount, and the local Vagrant does their local Git repository. But when these guys build the boxes, they pull the artifacts out of the Jenkins build and deploy the code on the Omni. So the Omnis have the code, and everything's sitting there waiting for them.
Okay, so they will just bring it up, test it out. They don't really do any work on it.
They can, because that
We do allow SSH, I mean, right now we allow SSH access to a Vagrant box.
All local.
yeah, to their local.
And like he showed, we had some other Vagrant specific provisioning. So Packer gives you the flexibility to say, you know, I have these 4 builders. Look, when you're building a Vagrant box, we allow, like right now I just have a little line in there that allows SSH from anywhere on a Vagrant box. And that line doesn't, that small chef recipe doesn't run on any Amazon builds.
So it just gives them the same stack, is really what it
No,
comes
that
down
part
to.
I got it. I was just curious how developers.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, if we didn't do that, then yeah, they would boot the same thing and see if it worked.
anyone else?
I guess that's the end of sort of the official meeting. If people want to chat about whatever, then